What would make two newlyweds vanish from a cruise ship in the middle of the night, leaving behind their wallets, their identification, their money, and every single belonging they owned? Charles and Evelyn Morrison were last seen leaving dinner at 9:28 p.m. on August 15, 1995. By morning, they were gone. 31 years later, we still don't know if they jumped, if they fell, or if someone pushed them. But the evidence suggests something far more sinister than anyone wants to admit. If you're ready to dive deep into one of the most baffling disappearances in cruise ship history, do me a favor right now. Smash that like button, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button for Cold Crime Case. We're about to uncover a mystery that law enforcement tried to bury beneath the waves. The air smelled of diesel fuel, sunscreen, and ocean salt. Among the crowd of vacationers hauling suitcases and straw hats were Charles and Evelyn Morrison, both 31 years old, newlyweds from Knoxville, Tennessee. They had married exactly 5 days earlier in a riverside chapel ceremony attended by 70 guests. And this cruise was a gift from Charles's older sister, a travel agent who had insisted they deserved something unforgettable. Little did anyone know just how unforgettable this voyage would become, but for all the wrong reasons. Charles worked as a civil engineer for the city's public works department, methodical and precise in his habits. The kind of man who labeled his luggage with laminated tags and carried a backup set of travel documents in a sealed envelope. Friends and family would later describe him as someone who planned everything down to the smallest detail, someone who never left anything to chance. His co-workers at the public works department knew him as reliable, punctual, and thorough. He was the type of person who arrived 15 minutes early to every meeting and kept meticulous records of every project he managed. His supervisor, Thomas Henley, would later tell investigators that Charles had never missed a day of work in the 3 years he'd been employed there, and that he'd been looking forward to this honeymoon for months, counting down the days on a calendar he kept on his desk. Evelyn was a third-grade teacher known for her warmth and her collection of vintage postcards, which she bought in every place she visited and mailed to herself as a kind of ritual. She wore a silver bracelet engraved with their wedding date, August 7, 1995, and carried a small leather journal where she documented thoughts, sketches, and lists of things that made her happy. Her students at Greenwood Elementary School adored her. She had a way of making learning feel like an adventure, often incorporating stories and creative projects into her lesson plans. The principal, Margaret Dennison, remembered Evelyn as one of the most dedicated teachers on staff, someone who stayed late to help struggling students and who organized the school's annual science fair single-handedly. Evelyn's classroom was decorated with maps from around the world, each one marked with colorful pins indicating places she hoped to visit someday. The Caribbean had been circled in red marker, with a note that read "Honeymoon Destination," written in her neat, looping handwriting. The Morrisons were assigned cabin 318A on the port side of deck 3, a modest interior room with twin beds pushed together and a narrow closet. The cabin measured approximately 150 square feet, with beige carpeting and nautical-themed artwork bolted to the walls. There was a small desk with a fixed chair, a television mounted in the corner, and a bathroom barely large enough to turn around in. The cabin had no windows, no natural light, just the artificial glow of overhead fixtures and the constant hum of the ship's ventilation system. For many passengers, interior cabins were a budget-friendly choice, a place to sleep between days spent exploring ports and enjoying the ship's amenities. For Charles and Evelyn, it was supposed to be a cozy nest where they could begin their married life together, sharing whispered conversations in the darkness before drifting off to sleep. The ship departed at 6:15 in the evening, its horn blasting twice as it slipped away from the dock and turned south toward open water. By nightfall, the Florida coastline had dissolved into darkness, and the Caribbean dream was cutting through calm seas under a sky full of stars. The vessel itself was impressive, weighing 63,000 tons and stretching 780 feet from bow to stern. It had been built in Germany in 1988 and could accommodate up to 2,000 passengers and 800 crew members. The ship featured multiple restaurants, lounges, a casino, a theater, swimming pools, a fitness center, and a spa. For most of the passengers on board, it represented the vacation of a lifetime, a chance to escape the pressures of everyday life and indulge in a week of luxury and relaxation. Over the first 3 days, Crew members and fellow passengers would later recall seeing the couple frequently. They attended the welcome aboard party on the Lido deck, danced awkwardly to a reggae band at the poolside bar, and were photographed by the ship's official photographer standing beneath a banner that read, "Honeymoon Bliss Package." The photograph, which would later become a haunting piece of evidence, showed Charles in a light blue polo shirt and khaki shorts, his arm wrapped protectively around Evelyn's waist. Evelyn wore a floral sundress and sandals, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her smile bright and genuine. They looked like any other couple in love, embarking on an adventure together, unaware that their time was running out. Evelyn was particularly noticeable because she smiled at everyone, asked strangers where they were from, and often scribbled notes in her journal while sipping iced tea at breakfast. Several passengers remembered her from the breakfast buffet on the Riviera deck, where she would sit at a table near the window, watching the ocean while writing in her journal. One passenger, Linda Hargrove from Atlanta, Georgia, struck up a conversation with Evelyn on the morning of August 13th. Linda later told investigators that Evelyn had been excited about the trip, mentioning that she and Charles had been together for 3 years before getting married and that this cruise felt like a dream come true. Evelyn had shown Linda her journal, flipping through pages filled with pressed flowers, ticket stubs, and handwritten notes about their relationship. One entry, dated August 10th, just 2 days before the cruise, read, "I can't believe I get to spend the rest of my life with my best friend. Every day feels like a gift." Charles was quieter, content to listen, occasionally glancing at his watch as if mentally tracking the ship's progress. He seemed more reserved than Evelyn, less inclined to strike up conversations with strangers, but always polite when approached. The bartender at the Sunset Lounge, a man named Marcus Webb, remembered serving Charles a beer on the evening of August 13th. Marcus recalled that Charles had asked about the ship's route, wanting to know exactly when they would arrive in Cozumel and how long they would have to explore the port. Marcus had explained that the ship would dock at 8 in the morning and passengers would have until 6 in the evening to return before the ship departed for its next destination. Charles had nodded, seemingly satisfied with the information, and had left a generous tip before returning to his cabin. On the evening of August 15th, the 4th night at sea, they were confirmed to have eaten dinner at the Compass Rose dining room, a formal venue on Deck 5. The maitre d', a gentleman named André Rousseau who had worked on cruise ships for nearly 20 years, remembered them because Evelyn had requested a table near the window and had complimented the orchid centerpiece. They ordered grilled mahi-mahi and shared a slice of key lime pie. André recalled that the couple seemed happy, engaged in quiet conversation throughout the meal. Evelyn had asked about the chef's background, curious about the fusion of Caribbean and French cuisine featured on the menu. Charles had been more interested in the wine selection, choosing a moderately priced Chardonnay that André had recommended. The meal lasted approximately an hour and 15 minutes, and the couple left the dining room at around 9:30 in the evening. This was the last confirmed sighting of Charles and Evelyn Morrison alive. After leaving the Compass Rose dining room, the couple seemed to vanish into thin air. No one saw them return to their cabin. No one spotted them at any of the ship's bars or lounges. No one remembered seeing them on deck, watching the stars or taking a romantic midnight stroll. It was as if they had simply ceased to exist the moment they stepped out of that dining room. The ship's itinerary that night included a scheduled stop the following morning in Cozumel, Mexico, where passengers could disembark for shore excursions. The Caribbean Dream had several tours planned, including snorkeling trips to the Palancar Reef, visits to ancient Mayan ruins, and shopping expeditions through the local markets. Charles and Evelyn had booked a snorkeling excursion scheduled to depart at 9:30 in the morning, a trip that cost $65 per person and promised to showcase some of the most beautiful coral formations in the Caribbean. They had prepaid for the excursion when they booked their cruise, listing it as one of the highlights they were most looking forward to. But they would never make it to that excursion. But by dawn on August 16th, something had shifted. When the cabin steward, a man named Hector Villanueva, knocked on the door of 318A at 9:30 in the morning to deliver fresh towels, there was no answer. Hector had been working on cruise ships for 8 years, starting as a dishwasher before working his way up to cabin steward. He was responsible for cleaning and maintaining 42 cabins on Deck 3, a job that required him to be efficient, thorough, and respectful of passengers' privacy. He always knocked 3 times before using his passkey, a policy enforced by the cruise line to avoid startling guests or walking in on inappropriate situations. He used his passkey and entered. The beds were untouched, still made from the previous morning's housekeeping. Both suitcases sat open on the luggage rack, clothes folded inside. Evelyn's silver bracelet lay on the desk next to her journal, which was open to a page dated August 15th. The entry read, "Dinner was lovely. Charles seems more relaxed than I've seen him in months. Tomorrow we're going snorkeling. I can't wait to see the reef. Sometimes I have to pinch myself to believe this is real." The handwriting was steady, unhurried, giving no indication of distress or concern. Hector immediately felt that something was wrong. In his 8 years of working on cruise ships, he had encountered many situations. Passengers who slept through his morning visits, cabins left in disarray after late-night parties, and even a few medical emergencies. But he had never walked into a cabin where the beds were completely untouched and the passengers were nowhere to be found. The cabin looked frozen in time, as if Charles and Evelyn had stepped out for just a moment and would return any second. But there was an eerie stillness to the room, a sense that something terrible had happened. Hector backed out of the cabin and immediately contacted his supervisor, a woman named Rosa Mendez, who served as the head of housekeeping for decks 2 through 4. Rosa arrived at cabin 318A within 5 minutes, accompanied by the ship's assistant security officer, a man named Trevor Walsh. Trevor was a former police officer from Liverpool, England, who had joined the cruise line's security team 2 years earlier. He had investigated minor incidents on board: stolen wallets, drunken altercations, and the occasional medical emergency. But a missing couple was something entirely different. Trevor entered the cabin and began a systematic search. He checked the bathroom, looking for signs of illness or injury. He examined the suitcases, noting that both were still packed with clothes, toiletries, and personal items. Charles's backup travel documents were still in their sealed envelope, tucked into a side pocket of his suitcase. Evelyn's collection of vintage postcards, numbering 23 in total, was rubber-banded together and placed carefully in her suitcase alongside a book she had been reading, a mystery novel by Agatha Christie. Trevor found Charles's wallet in the top drawer of the desk, containing his driver's license, 3 credit cards, and $180 in cash. Evelyn's purse was hanging on the back of the bathroom door, with her identification, makeup, and a small amount of cash inside. Trevor's training told him that people who voluntarily leave a ship don't leave behind their wallets, identification, and money. They don't leave their suitcases packed and ready to go. They don't abandon a prepaid excursion they were excited about. Something was very, very wrong. Trevor radioed the ship's head of security, Captain Heinrich Muller, a stern German officer who had been working in maritime security for 35 years. Captain Muller ordered an immediate search of the ship, deploying all available security personnel to comb through every public area, every deck, every lounge and restaurant. Announcements were made over the ship's public address system, asking Charles and Evelyn Morrison to report to the purser's desk immediately. The announcements were repeated every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours, in both English and Spanish, but there was no response. Meanwhile, crew members were questioned about their last sightings of the couple. André Rousseau, the maitre d', confirmed that they had left the Compass Rose dining room at approximately 9:30 the previous evening. A cocktail waitress named Simone Baptiste remembered seeing a couple matching their description walking toward the stern of the ship around 9:45, but she couldn't be certain it was them. A passenger named Robert Kellerman claimed he saw a man and woman arguing near the railing on deck 7 around 10 o'clock, but again, he couldn't positively identify them as the Morrisons. By noon on August 16th, Captain Muller made the decision to contact the United States Coast Guard and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The Caribbean Dream was sailing in international waters, approximately 230 miles southeast of Miami, which complicated jurisdictional issues. The ship was registered in Panama, carried passengers from multiple countries, and was en route to a Mexican port. Determining who had authority to investigate would become a legal nightmare that would drag on for months. The Coast Guard dispatched a helicopter from Air Station Miami, arriving at the Caribbean Dream at approximately 2:15 in the afternoon. 2 Coast Guard investigators, Lieutenant Commander Rachel Foster and Petty Officer James Chun, were lowered onto the ship's helipad and immediately began working with Captain Muller's security team. They reviewed security camera footage, interviewed crew members and passengers, and conducted a thorough search of the ship, including areas not accessible to passengers. The security camera footage revealed some troubling gaps. The Caribbean Dream had cameras in most public areas: the lobby, the casino, the main dining rooms, and the pool decks. However, there were no cameras in the corridors leading to passenger cabins, a cost-saving measure that would prove catastrophic to the investigation. The last clear footage of Charles and Evelyn showed them leaving the Compass Rose dining room at 9:28 in the evening on August 15th. After that, they disappeared from view. Lieutenant Commander Foster reviewed every frame of footage from 9:28 until midnight, searching for any sign of the couple. She found nothing. It was as if they had simply evaporated the moment they left the dining room. Foster also noted that the camera covering the stern of Deck 7, where Robert Kellerman claimed to have seen a couple arguing, had malfunctioned between 9:30 and 10:15 that evening, displaying only static. Cruise line officials claimed it was a routine technical glitch, but Foster found the timing highly suspicious. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story, because what comes next will challenge everything you think you know about safety at sea. The investigation quickly expanded beyond the ship itself. The Coast Guard conducted a search and rescue operation, deploying boats and helicopters to scan the waters between Fort Lauderdale and Cozumel, covering a search area of approximately 12,000 square nautical miles. They searched for 2 days using thermal imaging equipment and sonar to detect any signs of bodies in the water. They found nothing. No clothing, no personal belongings, no bodies. It was as if Charles and Evelyn Morrison had never existed. The FBI assigned 2 agents to the case: Special Agent Derek Hammond, a veteran investigator with 15 years of experience in missing persons cases, and Special Agent Lisa Moreno, a forensic specialist who had worked on several high-profile maritime investigations. They flew to Cozumel and boarded the Caribbean Dream when it docked on August 17th, beginning their investigation while the ship was still full of passengers and crew. Hammond and Moreno started by securing cabin 318A as a crime scene, despite protests from cruise line executives who insisted there was no evidence of a crime. The agents photographed every inch of the cabin, collected fingerprints, and bagged potential evidence, including Evelyn's journal, Charles's travel documents, and several strands of hair found on the pillows. They also collected the bedding, towels, and carpeting, looking for any trace of blood or signs of a struggle. The forensic analysis would take weeks, but preliminary tests revealed no blood, no signs of violence, and no indication that anything criminal had occurred in the cabin. The agents interviewed over 100 passengers and 50 crew members over the next 3 days, compiling a timeline of the Morrisons' activities and searching for anyone who might have had contact with them after 9:30 on August 15th. Most passengers remembered seeing the couple at various points during the cruise, but couldn't provide any useful information about their disappearance. A few passengers reported hearing a loud splash around 10:15 on the evening of August 15th, but they couldn't pinpoint the exact location or time. One passenger, Martha Simmons from Des Moines, Iowa, claimed she heard a woman scream around 10:30, but she had been several drinks deep at the casino and couldn't be certain of what she'd heard. Agent Moreno paid particular attention to the crew members who had access to passenger cabins. In addition to Hector Villanueva, there were 3 other cabin stewards assigned to Deck 3, Maria Santos, Jean Park, and Ahmed Hassan. All 4 were interviewed extensively and submitted to polygraph tests, which they passed. None of them reported seeing anything unusual on the evening of August 15th, and all of them had alibis that could be verified by other crew members. The investigation also looked into the backgrounds of Charles and Evelyn Morrison, searching for any indication that they might have staged their own disappearance. Agent Hammond contacted Charles's employer, the Knoxville Public Works Department, and learned that Charles had no financial troubles, no criminal record, and no known enemies. His bank accounts showed steady deposits and reasonable spending habits. There were no large withdrawals or suspicious transactions in the weeks leading up to the cruise. Similarly, Evelyn's background check revealed nothing unusual. She had no debts, no legal problems, and was well-liked by everyone who knew her. Hammond and Moreno also investigated the possibility of murder-suicide, a scenario that occurs more frequently on cruises than most people realize. They looked for signs of marital trouble, interviewing friends and family members who had attended the wedding. Everyone described Charles and Evelyn as a happy couple, deeply in love and excited about their future together. Evelyn's best friend, Susan Chun, told investigators that Evelyn had called her from the ship on August 14th, gushing about how wonderful the cruise was and how happy she was to finally be married to Charles. There was no indication of any conflict or unhappiness. The FBI also considered the possibility of accidental death. Could Charles and Evelyn have gone up to one of the higher decks to watch the stars and somehow fallen overboard? It seemed unlikely, given that the ship's railings were 42 inches high, making it difficult for an adult to accidentally fall over. Additionally, there were no witnesses who reported seeing the couple on any of the upper decks that evening. As the investigation continued, the cruise line faced mounting pressure from the media and from Charles and Evelyn's families. The Morrisons' parents, Richard and Patricia Morrison and David and Helen Carter, held a press conference in Knoxville on August 20th, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. Patricia Morrison, Evelyn's mother, broke down in tears as she described her daughter as a kind, loving person who had her whole life ahead of her. Richard Morrison, Charles's father, demanded answers from the cruise line, accusing them of negligence and of failing to properly secure the ship. The cruise line, Caribbean Voyages International, issued a carefully worded statement expressing sympathy for the families and promising full cooperation with law enforcement. However, behind the scenes, the company was more concerned with damage control than with finding answers. Internal emails obtained later through a civil lawsuit revealed that executives were worried about the impact the disappearance would have on bookings and were instructed to minimize media coverage and downplay the incident. The FBI's investigation eventually hit a wall. Despite interviewing hundreds of people, reviewing thousands of hours of security footage, and conducting extensive forensic analysis, they found no definitive evidence of what had happened to Charles and Evelyn Morrison. The case was officially classified as a missing persons investigation, with both Charles and Evelyn presumed dead. The FBI maintained an open file, but without new leads, there was little they could do. In the months following the disappearance, several theories emerged, each one more disturbing than the last. Some investigators believed that Charles and Evelyn had been victims of foul play, possibly murdered by a crew member or another passenger. The theory was supported by the malfunctioning security camera and the reports of a couple arguing near the stern. However, without a body, without a murder weapon, and without a clear motive, this theory remained purely speculative. Another theory suggested that Charles and Evelyn had been the victims of human trafficking, kidnapped from the ship and smuggled to a foreign country. This theory was popular among some conspiracy theorists but was largely dismissed by law enforcement. The logistics of kidnapping two people from a cruise ship, transporting them off the vessel without being detected, and keeping them hidden for an extended period seemed implausible. A third theory, and perhaps the most chilling, was that Charles and Evelyn had been deliberately pushed overboard by someone who knew them, possibly as part of a planned murder. This theory gained traction when investigators discovered that Charles had a life insurance policy worth $500,000, with Evelyn listed as the primary beneficiary. However, Evelyn also had a life insurance policy worth $300,000, with Charles as the beneficiary. If both of them were dead, the money would go to their respective families, not to any individual who might have had a motive to kill them. The life insurance angle led nowhere. The families of Charles and Evelyn Morrison filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Caribbean Voyages International in 1997, alleging negligence and inadequate security measures. The lawsuit claimed that the cruise line had failed to properly monitor passenger safety, had inadequate security camera coverage, and had not responded appropriately when the couple was reported missing. The case dragged on for 3 years, with depositions, expert testimony, and heated courtroom battles. In 2000, the cruise line settled out of court for an undisclosed sum, rumored to be in the millions of dollars. As part of the settlement, Caribbean Voyages International admitted no wrongdoing but agreed to improve security measures on all of its ships, including installing additional cameras and increasing security staff. The disappearance of Charles and Evelyn Morrison had a lasting impact on the cruise industry. It highlighted the vulnerabilities of cruise ship security and the challenges of investigating crimes that occur in international waters. In the years following the incident, several other passengers disappeared from cruise ships under mysterious circumstances, leading to increased scrutiny from lawmakers and safety advocates. In 2010, Congress passed the Cruise Vessel Security and Safety Act, which mandated improved security measures, better training for crew members, and more comprehensive reporting of crimes that occur on cruise ships. But for the families of Charles and Evelyn Morrison, no amount of legislative action could bring back their loved ones or provide the closure they desperately sought. Richard and Patricia Morrison became advocates for cruise ship safety, speaking at conferences and working with lawmakers to improve regulations. They established the Morrison Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting families of people who disappear on cruise ships and to pushing for better safety standards in the maritime industry. David and Helen Carter, Evelyn's parents, took a different approach. They hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent named Michael Ortiz, to continue searching for answers. Ortiz spent 5 years investigating the case, traveling to Cozumel, interviewing crew members who had since left the cruise line, and following up on leads that the FBI had deemed unworthy of pursuit. Ortiz's investigation uncovered some interesting details, but ultimately failed to solve the mystery. One of Ortiz's most significant findings was the testimony of a crew member named Diego Ramirez, who worked as a dishwasher in one of the ship's kitchens. Ramirez had been interviewed briefly by the FBI in 1995 but had not been considered a key witness. When Ortiz tracked him down in 2003, Ramirez revealed that he had seen something unusual on the night of August 15th. Around 10 o'clock that evening, Ramirez had been taking a smoking break on a service deck, an area not accessible to passengers. He claimed he saw 3 people on Deck 7, near the stern, engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument. Ramirez said one of the people was a woman with dark hair, which matched Evelyn's description. The other 2 were men, but Ramirez couldn't see their faces clearly because it was dark and they were some distance away. Ramirez said he watched for a few minutes before returning to work, thinking it was just a typical cruise ship drama. Ramirez's testimony was intriguing, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who were the 2 men? Were they passengers or crew members? Why hadn't Ramirez reported this to the FBI during the original investigation? Ramirez claimed he hadn't thought it was important at the time and had been afraid of getting involved, fearing he might lose his job or face legal trouble. Ortiz tried to verify Ramirez's story by checking crew schedules and interviewing other workers who might have been on deck that night, but he couldn't find anyone who could corroborate the account. Ortiz also discovered that 2 male passengers had disembarked in Cozumel on August 16th and had not reboarded the ship. The cruise line's manifest showed that passengers Marcus Tolliver and Gregory Brennan, both from Miami, Florida, had purchased the cruise together and had been scheduled to complete the entire 10-day voyage. However, they left the ship in Cozumel and never returned. When Ortiz tried to track them down, he discovered that both men had used fake identification to book the cruise. The addresses and phone numbers they provided were fraudulent, and there was no record of Marcus Tolliver or Gregory Brennan ever existing in Miami or anywhere else in the United States. This discovery sent Ortiz down a rabbit hole of speculation. Were these 2 men responsible for the disappearance of Charles and Evelyn Morrison? Had they targeted the couple for some unknown reason? Were they professional criminals, human traffickers, or hired killers? Ortiz shared his findings with the FBI, but without more information, there was little they could do. The trail had gone cold, and Marcus Tolliver and Gregory Brennan, whoever they really were, had vanished as completely as Charles and Evelyn. In 2008, a woman named Rebecca Stiles came forward with a story that reignited interest in the case. Stiles, who lived in Tampa, Florida, claimed that she had been on the Caribbean Dream in August 1995 and had witnessed something disturbing. According to Stiles, she had been walking on Deck 7 around 10:15 on the evening of August 15th, when she saw 2 men forcing a woman over the railing. Stiles said she screamed and ran to get help, but by the time she returned with a security officer, there was no one there. The security officer had told her she must have been mistaken, that she had probably seen passengers playing around or engaging in a prank. Stiles said she had been so shaken by the incident that she had stayed in her cabin for the rest of the cruise and had never reported it to the FBI. Stiles' story was sensational, and it received significant media coverage. However, investigators were skeptical. Why had Stiles waited 13 years to come forward? Why hadn't she contacted the FBI during the original investigation? Stiles claimed she had been traumatized by the incident and had suppressed the memory for years, only recently coming to terms with what she had witnessed. She agreed to undergo hypnosis and a polygraph test, both of which she passed. However, memory experts pointed out that memories recovered through hypnosis are notoriously unreliable and can be influenced by suggestion or external information. The FBI reopened the case briefly in 2008, following up on Stiles' testimony and conducting new interviews. They were unable to verify her account or find any corroborating evidence. The case was closed again, with investigators concluding that while Stiles may have genuinely believed she witnessed something, her testimony was not reliable enough to build a case on. Over the years, the disappearance of Charles and Evelyn Morrison has been featured on numerous true crime television shows, podcasts, and documentaries. Each one has presented different theories, interviewed different witnesses, and offered different explanations. Some have suggested that the couple was murdered by a serial killer who preyed on cruise ship passengers, pointing to other unsolved disappearances that occurred around the same time. Others have suggested that Charles and Evelyn staged their own disappearance to escape debts or legal troubles, a theory that has been thoroughly debunked by investigators. One of the most persistent theories is that Charles and Evelyn were victims of a crime of opportunity, targeted by someone on the ship who saw them as easy prey. The theory suggests that the couple may have been followed from the dining room to a secluded area of the ship, where they were robbed, assaulted, and then thrown overboard to eliminate witnesses. This theory is supported by the fact that cruise ships can be dangerous environments, with limited security and thousands of people from different backgrounds sharing a confined space. However, without evidence, this theory remains just another speculation in a case full of unanswered questions. In 2015, 20 years after the disappearance, the families of Charles and Evelyn Morrison held a memorial service in Knoxville. Over 200 people attended, including friends, family members, former colleagues, and students who had been taught by Evelyn. The service was a bittersweet affair, a chance to remember two people who had been taken too soon and to reflect on the impact they had on the lives of those who knew them. Patricia Morrison gave a tearful speech, describing her daughter as a bright light who had been extinguished far too early. She urged anyone with information about the case to come forward, holding out hope that someday, somehow, the truth would be revealed. The case of Charles and Evelyn Morrison remains officially unsolved. The FBI's file is still open, and investigators have said they will pursue any credible leads that emerge. However, after 3 decades, the chances of solving the case seem increasingly slim. The witnesses are aging, memories are fading, and crucial evidence may have been lost or destroyed long ago. The ocean keeps its secrets, and it seems unlikely that Charles and Evelyn will ever be found. Yet the story of the Morrisons continues to captivate people around the world. It serves as a cautionary tale about the hidden dangers of cruise ship travel, a reminder that even in paradise, evil can lurk. It raises questions about corporate responsibility, law enforcement jurisdiction, and the challenges of investigating crimes that occur on the high seas. And it stands as a testament to the enduring love of two families who refuse to give up hope, who continue to search for answers, and who keep the memory of Charles and Evelyn alive. The MS Caribbean Dream continued to sail under various names until 2018, when it was finally decommissioned and sold for scrap. Cabin 318A, the room where Charles and Evelyn Morrison were last seen, was renovated multiple times over the years, its dark history scrubbed away with fresh paint and new carpeting. But those who knew the story could never forget what happened there, or what might have happened somewhere on that ship on the night of August 15, 1995. As we close this chapter, we're left with haunting questions that may never be answered. What really happened to Charles and Evelyn Morrison? Were they the victims of a random act of violence, or was their disappearance part of a more sinister plot? Did they go overboard accidentally, or were they pushed? And if they were murdered, who was responsible and why? The truth is, we may never know. But their story serves as a reminder to all of us who love true crime, who seek justice for victims, and who refuse to let these cases fade into obscurity. Charles and Evelyn Morrison deserved better. They deserve to live out their lives together, to grow old, to have children, to chase their dreams. Instead, they became another statistic, another unsolved mystery, another tragedy lost to the depths of the ocean. If this case has moved you, if you believe that Charles and Evelyn Morrison deserve justice, then I need you to do something right now. Smash that like button to show your support for their families who still search for answers. Drop a comment below sharing your theory about what happened that night or just letting us know that you stand with the Morrison and Carter families in their quest for truth. And subscribe to Cold Crime Case, because we will never stop telling these stories. We will never stop searching for answers, and we will never let the victims be forgotten. Turn on that notification bell so you're here with us every time we crack open another cold case that the world tried to forget. This is Cold Crime Case, where the truth never stays buried forever, and justice never expires. Charles and Evelyn Morrison, we haven't forgotten you. We never will.